My name's Vince Sanderson. I'm a manager and management coach, and I'm going to be delivering a 30-minute presentation on what it's like to be a manager in 2024 and how I use the mmhmm app to help myself out and to help the team out and to keep us moving in the right direction. Now, it's a really interesting topic because management hasn't really changed in the past, I don't know, 100, 200 years. There's still this feeling that managers are people from the old days that pull out their pointed finger and tell people off and micromanage. And if something's going wrong, they'll be breathing down your neck and you'll be fired because you've upset the manager. But that's not the case anymore. We need to move into the modern day and we need to realize that it's a different generation that we're working with. Systems have changed. The world has changed, certainly since COVID. And therefore, our skills and processes, tools and techniques need to keep up with that. And one of the tools that I use is mmhmm. And I'm going to talk through how I use it alongside some of the pitfalls and ideas around people management in general. So first of all, I just want to give you a little background as to who I am. So Vince, and I used to be a school teacher, secondary school teacher. So that's 11 to 18-year-olds if you're not in the UK. I then decided to leave teaching. I moved into working with young people still, but in a criminal justice sense. So when people had caused harm to another person or community, learning how to bring them together for mediation of some kind. After that, I've gone into people management and I work with companies and organizations to support them and manage my own team at the same time. So a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk around today still directly affects me as a person. And that's why I use apps like mmhmm, because I found it particularly useful in connecting us and keeping us moving in the right direction. You'll also find me on social media. I'll put some of my information on the last slide. So feel free to connect with me if you'd like to after this presentation. So the focus of this presentation is about mmhmm and how I use it. But in particular, I want to just touch on the fact that people management is sometimes a missed skill. If you're a manager, certainly if you're a new manager, you'll have probably received recent training on project management or process management, how to do the thing, which is great. And we should continue to do that. But it's at least only half the job. You could argue that people management, if you don't get that right, you won't get the project or process management right. So people management is at least, if not more, of half the job of being a good manager. But how many of you ever received any training on that? Or were you thrown in the deep end, given a bit of project and process management, and then off you go? Because maybe you were a great individual contributor in the company or in the previous role. But you'll probably realize, if you've not already, that managing people is a really different skill set to what you may have used in the past. And not many managers get training on people management, partly because it's just not considered in the same way, partly because we say things like, oh, it's just common sense, just, talk to them how you like to be talked to. Well, that may be the problem in itself. Maybe you like something very different to some of your team members, but also because people management is complex. There are simple, complicated, and complex systems. Simple is A plus B equals C. It's pretty straightforward, and it's repeatable, and it'll be the same every day. Complicated is A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus F, and so on. But it's predictable. It's almost like building a rocket. As long as you understand the maths, the science, the technology behind it, and you follow the process, in theory, at the end, you'll get a rocket. Managing people is a complex system. A plus B equals C on Monday, but on Tuesday, A plus B equals yellow. And sometimes it just doesn't make sense. And what works on Monday may not work on Tuesday, and what works with one person may not work with another person. And so I think this is what puts people off. It feels like you're banging your head against a brick wall sometimes, that words are going in one ear and out of the other because people aren't listening. But there can be a whole host of things going on behind the scenes. And people management and being a good manager in general is the willingness and the ability to sit with that and to be patient and to support and to challenge and to work through that rather than just be frustrated and dismiss people. So I'm going to touch on a couple of different ideas as we go through and link back to how I tackle it using the app. So in this presentation, as I said, it's going to be about 30 minutes. I'll give you an overview of what you need to consider when managing people. I've already begun to touch on that, and then how I use mmhmm. So just a general thought as to why managing a team and why managing people in and of itself is quite tricky before you even get going, because there are these four competing needs that you have to balance. There's business needs, such as making a profit. There's team needs, which may not actually be the same. We like to think it is, but it might not be. We've got your individual needs as a manager, and then we've got individual team member needs as well. And the role of the manager is to balance these four competing needs. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's why we have a vision and a mission statement to guide all of these things, to make sure that we're all aligned and we have an agreed sense of purpose. On paper, absolutely true. But in reality, that doesn't always transfer from paper into people's day-to-day work. So that's the job of the manager. So one of the things that I would like to say is that management isn't and shouldn't be for everyone. And that's a really difficult thing to address, because for many people, it's the next step in their career. And they don't really have another choice if they want a pay rise, a promotion, more recognition, or more say in the direction that the company goes. The options usually are, for most companies, well, that's management. But as you probably know, it's a very different job. And sadly, there are some common things that happen when people start managing and they're not quite the right fit for it. And I'm going to share three of the most common ones. So the first one is, you hear people saying, it feels like babysitting. And sadly, some managers out there do think that. They do think that their role is just to manage people arguing and get in the way of bickering and try and sort it out. And it gets in the way of them doing their job. Managing a team and managing people should be a priority. And when I say managing, I don't mean telling them off and sorting them out. I mean connecting with them, building a connection, building a relationship with them, getting team cohesion. Because when you do that, it reduces a lot of the tension and the conflict within teams. If you think that it feels like babysitting, that influences how you interact with people. Your thoughts influence your behaviors. And so if I think, oh, not this again, oh, I don't want to come to work to have to deal with this, I've got kids at home, it's probably going to come across like you're less patient, you're less helpful, you're more frustrated, and the team pick up on that. And they don't feel that they can trust that person as a manager, that that manager is going to step in and support and help and guide. The second common theme that you hear from people who may not be the best place to be managers is that they thought that management was about sitting back, putting your hands up behind your head and relaxing and passing work on to other people. So in other words, that their workload was going to decrease. But if you think about it, if you are a manager or if you know managers, certainly good ones anyway, they will be supporting people with redundancies and job restructures. They will be supporting people with promotions. They will be managing conflict, mediation, supporting people with personal issues that are coming in or not coming in. Sometimes actually you end up being a pseudo counselor for people, rightly or wrongly, supporting people with lateness and trying to challenge them to be more productive or meet targets. A lot of these things go on behind the scenes that other team members don't know about, rightly so, because it's confidential, or it will negatively impact them knowing about these things. And so when people then become a manager, they're shocked at the amount of work, and then they're still expected to do processes and projects and sometimes still be an individual contributor. So it can be frustrating and it can be tiring and it can be difficult to feel inspired as manager if you didn't know that was going to be what the job entails. And then the last one is, well, I need to be a manager because I mentioned earlier, for many people, it's the only way for them to get promoted and to earn more money or to have more say in the direction of the company. And so if that is the only reason that someone wants a manager job, it's going to be potentially a bit of a shock to the system because they were in it for the wrong reasons. Managing a team and managing people should be about that, managing people and being excited and enthused and inspired to work with people, to connect with them, to listen to them, to understand them, to help them achieve something that they were struggling with. If you get that right, a lot of the other stuff falls into place, in my opinion. Now, if you are a new manager or you are building a new team or you've got new people coming in, I would always encourage you to think about these three things in particular. So listening and learning, fairly obvious, but some of the obvious stuff sometimes gets forgotten about in the day-to-day running of a business when you are looking for targets and hitting certain goals. Second one, we'll look at a macro, meso, and micro level, what we should do at those different levels. And the third one, I'm going to give you a little acronym that I use to just try and remind me what I should be focusing on when new people come into the team, or I might be starting a new team or starting a new project. So hours, H, humble, O, one-to-ones, U, understanding, R, review, and S, shadow. I will explain each of these in a moment, and I'm going to show you how I use with each of these elements of ours. So the first one, humble. The reason that I start here is I don't want to get to the point as a manager that I think I know best. I think Steve Jobs says this, but I may be attributing it to the wrong person. I think he said, it's not my job to be right. It's our job to get it right. Now, whoever said that, genius. And I think managers need to really take that on board, or leaders, in fact. That it is not my job to know all of the answers. It's not my job to decide every direction that we go in. If team members have really good insight, they're really knowledgeable around their area of the role, then why are we not listening to that? Why is that not impacting our decision making? And there's another lovely quote, which is, if you don't listen, you'll eventually be surrounded by people with nothing to say. If we're not humble and self-aware of our limitations and aware of the value that other people provide, then straight away we're off on the wrong foot with the team. And one of the ways which I use is to connect the team. Here's a little example of, there's all sorts of things you can do with it. It's very engaging. It's a very interactive app, not just for presenting, as you've probably seen. I can do all sorts of things with it, but also when you're connecting with the team, it's quite fun to use. It's better than Zoom for that sense. It's much better than Teams. We use it regularly when we're just connecting with each other. And it's really important to try and build in time, not just to find out about input and find out about status updates, but also to connect with people on a one-to-one or on a team basis. One of the miseries in jobs is anonymity. The feeling that you are invisible, the feeling that people don't know you. And it's massively emphasized when a manager gives the impression that they don't really care about the team, that they're just a commodity to be used to achieve a certain goal, and they're not valued as people for people. So I would really encourage you to use get people on the screen, have some fun with it, and just talk and listen to each other. The second use I have for it is one-to-ones. And this is the place that I've probably used it the most, along with one of the other areas which I'll cover in a moment. So one-to-ones, and you can see on the screen with one of the team, we're talking through a selection of questions. The questions on here, really simple things like what's happened in the past 2 weeks for you. I tend to use 2-week blocks for doing one-to-ones. What's frustrating you at the moment? How can I support you to unblock those frustrations? What are your priorities for the upcoming 2 weeks? And then lastly, how are you as a person? You might think that's an odd one to end with. Surely that should be at the start. But just over time, I found that people are more honest towards the end of a conversation. And so if you say, how are you at the start? Most people go, fine. Yeah. All right. Thanks. And then we move on to the next question without really listening and understanding how someone is. So my personal experience is that putting that towards the end of the conversation often creates a more fruitful conversation because I actually want to know how people are. The third way that I use it is for understanding. As I mentioned earlier, Companies can be great at writing down strategic plans and coming up with mission statements or even yearly operational plans, but they don't always translate into day to day work for team members if we're not careful. Sometimes they're written and they're saved somewhere and they don't really influence conversations and people don't look at them. So having videos pre-recorded to explain things can be really helpful with this. For example, this could be our strategic plan. We could also have done a SWOT analysis and be talking around what ideas people have. People could add to it, people could explain it, people could record videos of their thoughts and feelings on it. So it doesn't have to be all at the same time. And I think this is really important in general for meetings. It's something to consider yourself. Why are we meeting? Is it to give information? Well, could that not have been an email or a phone call or a video? Or is it to collaborate or problem solve or connect? If it's one of those three, meetings are really useful. But there are times where we just want to provide information, and it maybe is just my voice being heard on the whole because I'm giving some information. This is how I use it, is I record a lot more videos now to provide understanding to the team, and I encourage the same back. If they just want to provide status updates and they can see that we're both busy throughout the week, just record a quick video summarizing what's going on. That is much better than getting into a meeting and it taking up a lot more time that might be unproductive. Now, the fourth way is reviewing. What needs to stay? What needs to go? And what just needs a little tweak? One of the roles of a manager may well be to guide the direction of the team. Where are we going in the future? But I would suggest that you can't do that effectively unless you know where you are currently and where you've come from. So reviewing what has gone in the past. What do we want to keep that's really effective? What do we want to leave in the past? Again, what just needs a small little amendment? One of the things that we used to do is often open up a document and then type comments around our thoughts about what's been written. The problem was that people would often write quite vague comments or not fully explain comments. And then we'd end up in a call saying, what do you mean by this? Did you mean this or that? And, oh, I disagree. And all of those types of things come out. Since moving to using mmhmm, we now record a lot of our thoughts and feelings, as you can see on the video that I'm demonstrating. And we have the time to explain our thought process behind the suggestion that we're making. And it has improved our efficiency quite significantly, actually, because we're not having to go back and forth. It also really helps because it can be done asynchronously. So we can be anywhere in the world, we can be in different time zones, and all we need to do is record a video explaining our thoughts and feelings, and then we can move on. And the final one, S, shadow. Really important that managers shadow their team. Now, I know that that brings up feelings for people of, oh, I'm going to be micromanaged. The last thing I would want is for my manager to shadow me. And that's usually because of bad past experiences where they have been micromanaged. So I'm not talking about micromanaging. I'm talking about following a team member around. I mean, in the past, that would have been done physically. Now it doesn't need to be. But to really understand what their role is. You cannot support someone if you don't understand what they do. Now, that I don't mean here that you know more than them. Actually, that can get in the way sometimes. You see this, managers that were brilliant individual contributors struggle to let go of that, and they end up micromanaging teams and, oh, you should do it this way. Oh, I've done this before. You need to do that. That's not what shadowing is. Shadowing is, right, how do you do it? Let me understand what goes through your brain. Let me understand the actual day-to-day job, because for me to support you, we've probably got to have robust conversations, and I can't do that if I don't understand what you do. So again, in this video, I've got a colleague that's explaining some of the work that he's getting on with, stuff that I don't know particularly well. So I'm asking some questions and really trying to understand his thought process behind it. But this has two benefits, really. Number one, useful for me. And number two, it's useful for someone to talk it out loud and explain things because it reinforces the learning that's going on for them as well. So really helpful use of mmhmm for live communication, dispersed teams again, and also for explaining and demonstrating what people do on a day-to-day basis, certainly now that a lot of us work in a hybrid system. So here are just some other common uses that I have for as a manager. So macro, keeping that vision alive, as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't just sit on a piece of paper, but we can make videos, we can demonstrate it, we can talk about it, but people can watch that in their own time and be reminded of it when they need to. Meso, avoiding meeting overload, as I mentioned, and keeping meetings just around collaboration, connection, or problem solving. And then at a micro level, process work updates so that one-to-ones don't become just about status updates and we can actually connect and problem solve and work through some frustrations that people have. Now, I just wanted to drop this in. This is a really interesting piece of research that I've reflected on for a number of years now. It's called Project Aristotle. It was done by Google a bit over a decade ago, and it took 4 years. 50,000 people were surveyed, 180 teams, over 100 variables measured. So a really robust piece of work done by them. And they wanted to find out what makes an effective team. And these were the top 5 elements that were important in being effective. And the number one priority for building an effective team was promoting psychological safety and building that from the ground up in the team. In other words, that team members can make mistakes and it not be held against them, that they can try risks. And if it fails, it doesn't matter. What did we learn from it? And it's a great way of building trust and connection in the team so that we know each other well, that we can challenge each other and it not be taken personally. It's so much more robust, and therefore we can move forward in a positive way and not have fake harmony where everyone just says yes and nods along with it, but they have no interest in actually doing what was said in that meeting. And then these other 5 impacts, making sure that there is dependability, making sure that there is very clear structure and clarity around roles and responsibilities, that their work is meaningful and that their work is impactful. And actually, you can use really well to encourage and promote these things. For example, having a video on explaining what people's roles and responsibilities are. You could do it from your point of view as the manager using their job roles and responsibilities. But even better, if you can have team members making a video of themselves explaining what they do, how their work may impact other people in the team, how their work is meaningful to them and meaningful to the customer. Really useful for new people joining a team so they can watch a series of videos and go, brilliant. I know what John does. I know what Kathy does. I know what Sid does. Brilliant. I know where I stand now, and I know where our roles overlap and where there's clear separation between the two. So as we move into the final part of the presentation, I just want to touch on one more point that I think is really important for managers in 2024, and that is managing younger generations, Gen Z and Gen Alpha in this case. I will say this, the younger generations have a very different experience growing up than I did and the older generations, my parents, grandparents had when they were growing up. And we can't hold that against them. That's really unfair to do as a manager and just as a person in general. They are a product of us, not just of themselves. For many people, myself included, we experience school sat in rows, facing the front, and the person at the front, the teacher in this case, was the ultimate authority in knowledge, and what they said went. We never questioned them. You never talk out of turn. You certainly never challenge them. But that's not what education is now. Schools are much more collaborative. It's much more around teamwork. It's much more around problem solving. It's much more around challenging each other and trying to work things out. And Gen Z and Gen Alpha bring that into the workplace. And so they're not used to, or certainly less used to, or not expecting managers to say, you do it my way, no questions asked. Traditionally, a big part of schooling was set up to prepare people for the workforce where the manager was the ultimate authority. And again, you never question the manager. And we just have to be mindful ourselves that is our mindset still like that? Do we struggle when people question us, certainly younger people? But I would argue that that's a really healthy thing to do for an organization, that young people should be questioning, should be challenging. Doesn't mean that they're right. It just means that questioning and challenging is a way of looking at the status quo. Is this actually the best way of doing it? Can we do something differently? And one of the things that we're certainly seeing is when I'm listening to younger people is that they want a better work-life balance. They don't necessarily want to work 9 till 5 in an office. Why can't I do it at home if I'm just as productive, arguably more productive? Why do I have to sit in traffic for 2 hours in order to get to an office where I could do that at home? And I think these are really good questions that managers should be willing to robustly talk through. And I also think that is really suited to working with younger generations in a hybrid approach where we're much more encouraging of autonomy and people to try and work it out themselves. And as a manager, my job isn't to tell them what to do, but to provide the right resources for them to work out how to do it. With a little bit of guidance, I should dictate the final outcome, maybe, but how you get there, I will provide the support for you to work out the best way you think it should be done. And I think that Gen Z and Gen Alpha are much more about that way of working, and we need to be mindful of that. And then lastly, we're also much more dispersed nowadays. And I think Gen Z and Gen Alpha and younger people that will move into the workforce will want to be able to work wherever and whenever. As long as I'm getting the job done, why do I need to sit in an office? Why do I need to do it in the same hours as you? Of course, there may be business needs being met there, and that requires a conversation. But my point being that managers, we need to be willing to have the conversation and not just stick to, well, that's how it was. That's how it was for me when I was a junior in work. And therefore, that's how it should be for you as well. We need to move past that and be about what's best for the business and what's best for the team members that work in that business. And let's balance those two to the best of our ability. And I think is a really suitable app for trying to balance those two things. And it's why I use it personally. And it's why I'd encourage you, if you're watching it as a manager or as a business owner, to really look into how you could utilize with your teams as well. So I really appreciate you listening to this presentation. Here are my details if you do want to connect. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks very much for listening.